I should say, the most prestigious, organization in our industry. And this award symbolizes excellence in pavement management practices. In a way, and Councilmember O'Farrell will relate to this, this award is like the Oscars in our industry. I mean, of course, it's not publicized as the Oscars, right? But this means a lot to the city of Los Angeles because the National Foundation took into consideration the private sector and government to present this prestigious award. So I want to share that with you simply because this award was possible as a result of your leadership, council members, as a result of your support to the city's pavement preservation program. As you well know, last year we completed a historical high of 2,400 lane miles of pavement preservation. And once again, none of that could be possible without your leadership and without your support. So thank you very much. And we share that award with you because you deserve a big part of it. So thank you very much. In regards to the Bureau's 2015 version of the State of the Street, let me say that the Bureau has provided this report 3 times before, in the years 2005, in the year 2008, and the year 2011. Every 3 years, the Bureau of Street Services completes a full assessment of the city's street network and reports to the elected officials and the community members the result of our report. Not just any municipality in the nation will provide this report every 3 years. We are the only big municipality in the nation that provides this level of detail to its constituents and to its elected officials. So we should be very proud of getting this report every 3 years. As a matter of fact, the results of this report are posted on our website. So in order to be extremely transparent with our residents and with our elected officials, the Bureau has made this information available to every person in the city, in the nation, and in the world. So to explain in detail the results of the 2015 State of the Streets report, I have Greg Spotts right here who will speak in detail about those findings.
Thank you very much. I'll be walking you through a short PowerPoint. Let's turn to page 2. This is just a summary of some of the findings in the State of the Streets report. Currently, we are in the second year of a 2,400 lane mile pavement preservation program, which is the largest program that the city's ever had. And that's, as Mr. Saucedo was saying, as a result of the support from the mayor and council. This 2,400 lane mile program has 2 major components: resurfacing, which is 855 lane miles a year. That's taking streets and bringing them back into a state of good repair. And then Slurry Seal at 1,545 lane miles a year, and that involves applying a thin coat of protective sealant to keep streets that are in a state of good repair, to keep them in good condition for longer. Also, adjunct to that program is the street pothole program, and we have committed to the mayor to have a 3 working day average turnaround time whenever we have anything less than 950 street potholes a month. And we've actually held it closer to 2 working days for the last 18 months or so. And we're using tablets and smartphones and other new technologies and the new citywide customer relationship management system in order to take paper out of that process and make that much quicker. The last 3 programs are the largest in the history of the city of LA, and I'd ask you to turn to the next slide, slide number 3. And this graph shows you the pavement preservation program over the last 7 years. The darker green is resurfacing lane miles, and the lighter green is the Slurry Seal. We made a red line at 2,000 lane miles because that's the level that the micropaver pavement management database tells us is needed to simply maintain the road system at its current level. The average pavement condition index from 0 to 100 of our road network has been 62. And in order to just maintain what we have, we need to do 2,000 lane miles of pavement preservation, and we weren't funded to do that for most of the last several decades. And so over the last several decades, there's been a steady, slow decline in the PCI because of an underinvestment in maintaining the road system. And you can see that in fiscal year 11-12, we actually did the amount of maintenance that is needed to preserve the road system at its current level. And then in the 3 subsequent years, we actually did a little bit more. It's not a lot, but every little bit more than 2,000 lane miles that we do, we start to address improving the net quality of the road system rather than keeping it the same. And as you can see, fiscal year 14-15 was an all-time high of 2,400 lane miles, and we're setting out to do the exact same thing this fiscal year. So on the next slide, what we did with this 4th triannual State of the Streets report was to do a 10-year look back, now that we have this library of State of the Streets reports, to see, where were we and where have we gotten to. So this slide here on page 4 looks at the residential streets, the smaller local streets. In 2005, 36% of those streets were in a state of good repair. So you could say, in a way, a little over a third of the residents in LA lived on a street that was in a state of good repair. And we've moved that up by 10 percentage points over the last 10 years. And this is the first time we've been able to say that we've made positive progress because of the investment that you saw on the previous slide. And a lot of what we're doing is we're identifying the streets that are in poor condition, the residential streets that do not have substantial base repair. And those are the ones that we can afford to mill off the top 2 inches and resurface. We can't afford right now to go into the ones where we have to mine out the base and replace the base. But there have been opportunities to get into some of the poor streets that simply are very old, but they haven't had base repair damage, and start to resurface those. And that's a driver for this increase of 10% here. Now let's go to slide 5 and look at the main streets, the major streets. And in this case, we've actually only been able to hold the line at 47% of the road surface area of those major streets being in a state of good repair over the last 10 years. And the reason why that number hasn't moved is that we have a higher load on those streets than we've ever had. A great deal of that is the articulated transit buses, the big red buses that you see, the 60-foot buses. And the loads from those buses are deteriorating the streets as fast as we can resurface them. So even though we have larger programs than we've had, we're just keeping up. And we're looking for possibilities like investing in more expensive but more durable binder to hold that asphalt together against that heavy load, to try to get the resurfacing of major streets to last longer. The next slide is a pie chart, slide number 6, that shows what percentage of all streets we're now combining the entire street network are in each condition. So 46% of streets are in good condition, a state of good repair with a PCI of 71 to 100. 22% are in fair condition, and 32% are in poor condition. In that 32% bucket are a lot of streets that have major base failure. And we hired a consultant, the city did a few years ago, Harris and Associates, who estimated something in the order of about a $3.5 billion cost to fix all of those streets that have had base failure. So we have an accumulated multi-decade backlog of streets where the base has failed, but our current strategy is moving the needle on the rest of the streets that don't have that type of base failure. 3.8 billion, 3.5 to 3.8 billion. And Harris thought it would take 15 years. Even if you had the money, it would take 15 years of work in addition to the program we're already doing in order to get it done. They didn't think that there was even the capacity to do it in 10 years. And then the last slide just shows how you can reach us. We're really multiplexing all the different ways you can get to us. The new MyLA 311 app launched in January that allows you to actually make a record right in the customer relationship management system. That is the fastest way to get a pothole filled or a tree emergency taken care of. And we're still taking requests by phone, on the web, and also through various social media. So both of us are available for any questions that you have.
Members, anyone have any questions? Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for this report. A couple of questions came to mind as you're speaking, and one is, what percentage of cement are you still able to use to replace cement streets? And is it still a significant reduction to what it was many, many years ago? And are you replacing, or do you tend to replace current cement streets and replace them with asphalt? That was the practice for some time.
Sure, yes. 5% of our streets currently still are concrete. And that percentage has been shrinking steadily over the decades because we've been overlaying them. We've been milling off. We've done some in your district recently, actually. We've been milling off 1 to 2 inches of the concrete and then putting asphalt on top and converting it into an asphalt street. And that concrete slabs actually become a very good base for an asphalt street. However, we have certain areas that are historic preservation overlay zones where the residents have opted to basically create sort of restrictions on the kind of public works that can be done, and they've opted to say that the street, the material of the street is of historic interest, and they only want concrete. And we don't currently have a funded program to replace concrete streets in kind, meaning in concrete.
You put that very gently, because in my district we've had people not just opt, but protest when crews show up. I know. It hasn't happened in a while, but I like how you said that, because I know how passionate people get about their concrete streets. In terms of asphalt, are there new technologies to reduce the heat island effect? Because that's a real concern with climate change in the
Absolutely.
summertime. And so you lay down new asphalt and it just absorbs the heat and it increases the ground temperature significantly. What are some of the new technologies to deal with that?
We've been very actively exploring those. Right now, there isn't a cool pavement treatment on a public street in California. People have been treating off-street asphalt like parking lots. Mostly private companies have been putting a very thin seal coat, thinner than our Slurry Seal, which actually has rubberized particles in it. Just a very thin 50-micron coat of like a gray coating, almost like a paint, which would make the asphalt absorb less heat. So we got a hold of one of these vendors, and we tried it in partnership with Recreation and Parks in right near where you are in Balboa Rec Center, Balboa Sports Complex in the parking lot. We wanted to try it off-street because we didn't know if it would meet the wet traction requirements of an on-street installation. We put that in last July, and then we had GSD Standards Lab come out and test that, and they found it did meet the skid and slip tests, meaning the wet traction test for both cars and pedestrians. So it is safe to put on a public street. We also found that it reduced the afternoon temperature of the pavement by about 10 degrees. So basically, as the day goes on, the pavement continues to heat up, and by 2, 3 o'clock in the summer, we were finding that, on a 90-degree day, the pavement was 140 degrees instead of 150 degrees. And we think that as the sun goes down, that difference in temperature would mean less heat reflecting into adjacent buildings, meaning less air conditioning needed. So we've put in a budget package for this next fiscal year to put down about 450,000 square feet of this material on low traffic areas like cul-de-sacs. And we were hoping to do a couple of cul-de-sacs in each council district. So we hope to explore that further with all of you during the budget process, and perhaps solicit your support for that program.
And I know that as asphalt bleaches, it kind of mitigates the heat island, but it's a real issue, and I think it's going to increasingly become one. So as the new technologies advance, I hope you can come to us with budget approvals to do more of that. In terms of the smartphone dispatching that began, what's the initial feedback? Is there a percentage of service requests that's sort of eating into, or what can you say about that so far?
I was looking at that data. The January data was very interesting. 13% of service requests that came to Public Works in January came through the smartphone app. But the percent that was through the smartphone app was very different in different types of service requests. So 20% of the pothole requests came through the app, but only like 3 to 4% of the tree emergencies, which made me wonder if people, when they see a tree down, they want to call somebody. want to make sure that the real person heard about it. But when they want to report a pothole, they may not even want to talk to somebody. They may think, I don't even have the time to talk to somebody about this, but if I have the convenience of taking a picture and putting it in the app, then I'm going to call it in. So we're very interested to see how that progresses. The marketing effort around the app hasn't launched yet. That was a soft launch in early January. So we're interested to see, do we get more service requests or different types of service requests as the uptake of that app continues.
And just two more quick ones, and that is on Slurry Seal. I've been in my district long enough to kind of know all the streets that have been slurry sealed that are now beginning to fail and need to be resurfacing. For example, Riverside Drive, and probably Riverside Drive all the way through the 4th and 13th for that matter, because it's been about 8 years since it was slurried, and it's starting to deteriorate pretty quickly. Do you have all of those flagged in terms of the slurry seal lifespan is, I think, about 7 years typically? Do you have those flagged for?
Yes, I mean, what's great about the survey, there's a survey that underlies these findings we were just presenting, and that's a van driving every single block of the city, one lane, photographing it with high-definition video and using lasers to sense changes in the terrain. And then we analyze that and give it a grade, and we assign certain types of distresses. So we actually have every 3 years intelligence information on each block, how it's degrading, and that's primarily how we decide what streets to pave and what streets to slurry seal, and then we bring those proposed plans, to each council office for your feedback. So we really do have a data-driven strategy in approaching that. Now, of course, there's more need than there are miles, even with a 2,400-mile program, but the primary reason why we won that award is the data-driven strategy that we have.
And the community beautification opt-in program, how many districts currently exist, and can you elaborate a little bit on what those are?
Do you want to answer that one?
Councilman, can you be a little bit more specific on that?
The community beautification opt-in districts?
Regarding the mayor's smart streets.
Okay. Yeah, it's regarding the Smart Streets program from the mayor's office.
Okay, yeah. Well, again, we're working right now very closely with the other agencies involved, BOE, Contract Administration, Building and Safety, of course, the CLA and the CAO. And right now we're in the process of analyzing each one of those motions. We're working diligently in creating the data that will allow us to provide a menu of options to the elected officials. At this point, we don't have a lot of data yet, Councilman. We're working on it. We'll be very happy to come back to you and give you a quick update on the latest once we have more information.
Okay.
But one thing, for example, I can tell you, one of the big concerns that we have in terms of the street smart motions is, of course, revisiting the street damage restoration fee ordinance, right? And we're working right now with Dr. Shaheen, which he was the creator of the original report that validated the streets, the life of the streets deteriorates at a rapid scale once the street is excavated, right? So we are putting together a brand new report that will also take into consideration the effects of, the heavy buses, et cetera, et cetera. But right now we're in the embryonic phase. We're working we're working closely with all the agencies, and once we have more information, Councilman, I should be able to give you more detail.
Okay. All right. Well, congratulations on your Academy Award.
Thank you.
It's very beautiful.
Any other questions, colleagues? Mr. Price?
Congratulate you on a job well done. I know we're been overcoming some challenges that you've outlined, but it looks like we're on the upward trend, and I think data-driven does really make a difference. You talked to us, I think, last time about streets that are in good condition versus poor condition. Could you just review for us again briefly? These poor condition streets are concentrated in one area, are they citywide, or how do you determine them?
There are 8,200 lane miles of streets in poor condition. They're citywide. They're all over. 60% of them are residential, and the balance are majors and collectors. And most of them are simply very, very old. All those years of not doing enough resurfacing left us with streets that had gone beyond their service life. And once they start cracking up, then when it does rain, that rain comes in and starts to damage the base. And that's where it becomes $1 million a mile or more to excavate that base out and put new base in. So
So the cost for repairing a good street versus a bad street is doubled, or just depends, or what? A good street versus bad?
can you repeat
Cost
the
of
question?
repair for a good
Yes,
versus...
it can be triple or more to excavate the base than just to mill off the top 2 inches and put a new cap on it. Most of what we're doing today is the latter. We're milling off pavement that's not good, revealing a nice solid base and putting new pavement on top, whereas these $3.5 to $3.8 billion job of going into the neighborhoods where the streets you'd have to excavate even up to 12 inches of material to put down new base. That's the long-term overhang of many decades of failing to invest enough in the streets.
I'm sure some of those streets are in my district. In fact, some areas where there are no sidewalks. And I know my area is not alone, but we do have them citywide. How do you, when the weather's nice, there are no problems. But we certainly learned during this last rainstorm, some of our streets are in real bad condition. I mean, they're overflowing, they're flooding, the curbs are impassable. What can we do to, or what are you doing, I guess I should say, to help identify these streets in advance? What are we doing now, for example, in identifying areas that we know are going to be problems that historically have flooded, have been a real problem for neighbors? What can we do now? What are we doing now to address those problems in advance?
Right. I mean, sometimes it depends on the presence of available drainage. There are parts of the city that don't have catch basins and storm drains, and those areas are very hard to stop from flooding because there's nowhere for the water to go. Where there are catch basins, I know our colleagues in sanitation have been proactively cleaning and clearing those catch basins in advance of El Nino. When we come and resurface a street, we call BOE survey if we believe that we need to look carefully at the geometry to see if there's a drainage that could be fixed. Sometimes we come and fix concrete gutter that's been jacked up so that we have proper drainage before we do the resurfacing. During that 2-day storm in January, we had over 400 flooding service requests come in a matter of 2 days, and we inspected them all and used hand tools to clear the storm drain if it was clearable, and if we thought it was a bigger issue, we referred it to sanitation. So there are layers on top of it, but in this business, you do end up having to talk to constituents who own a home where there isn't any drainage at all, and that's part of there are neighborhoods like that where there isn't underground drainage to put the water into.
And those kind of streets, Councilman, require capital improvement investment. That is, we need to get the necessary funding to properly improve the public works infrastructure right there. Not only the street, but building storm drains, building, the right mechanisms to catch and properly take the water from the streets and take it to the ocean. So it's more than the resurfacing funding, what's needed to address those particular streets, yes.
Thank you for your service.
Mr. Wu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. In certain areas of my district where you guys come and repair the street or slurry seal it, it takes some time for DOT to come and stripe. Can you kind of comment and talk about the processes of coordination between yourself and Department of Transportation when it comes to striping? But not just that, but also your coordination with DWP, other city entities, before you tear up a street that you have spoken to DWP as well as outside entities like gas company or the electric or other various entities that would tear up the street.
Absolutely. We have a whole section called our coordinating section that goes and does utility clearances before we decide to work on a street. We clear that resurfacing project with over 200 public and private utilities, and they have an incentive to let us know if they want to put a hold on something and have us wait till they finish their work, because the street damage restoration fee ordinance says that they can't cut into it within the first year after we pave it. If they do so, they'd have to pave it curb to curb themselves. So we have very good coordination in that regard. We also have very close coordination with LADOT. Under this mayor, we have this 2,400 lane mile working group that meets every 2 weeks, just in the room right behind here, actually. We've been doing that for 2 fiscal years now, and airing all kinds of different issues that we have with our various partners in GSD, BOE, DOT. So we have very good coordination with DOT. There was a time where we were just doing more work than they had the capacity to stripe, and that problem was brought to the surface in the 2,400 working group, and the response was to bring on a contractor to provide surge capacity for DOT. I wouldn't want to speak for them, but I have heard in those meetings that much of the residential work of striping, most of it slurry related, is now being done by that contractor, saving the city forces to do the arterials. So there's a lot more resources now than there were previously to, catch up with our big 2,400 mile program.
And as for enforcement, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know in the past, whether it's telecommunications, DWP, or gas company, especially concrete streets, when they tear it up, they're supposed to fill it back with concrete, but many do with asphalt or other even asphalt streets where they kind of do a hodgepodge job. So who enforces and how do we enforce, and what other measures have you guys taken to prevent things like that?
Sure, yeah, we find that just as frustrating as you do and the constituents do. The Bureau of Engineering is the permitting agency for making a street cut, and the Bureau of Contract Administration enforces that the work was done properly. I think we all in the building wish that they had more inspectors, at BCA to be out watching more of the work. The best way to ensure that that work is done properly is to have somebody standing there watching it, and some of the more affluent, smaller municipalities are able to do that more. We do find that a lot of the calls that we get that people say are potholes are really sunken utility trenches where they have failed to compact the material that they filled up that trench with. So they paved over uncompacted material, and therefore the traffic compacts it. And now you have a trench that's, a half inch to an inch or an inch and a half depression, and we see that all the time. The ordinance says that they're supposed to leave a little tiny medallion for who did it. But few of the utilities are doing that. I've seen the gas company ones out there a lot, but many of the other companies are not doing that. So we definitely have a ways to go as a city, in improving that. And I think, some of those functions were subjects of some of those street smart motions as well.
Yeah, that's something that I want to work with you guys on, as well as Bureau of Engineering. And, my colleague, Councilman Rofero, brought up concrete streets. Thank you for bringing that up, because I think Council District 4 is the epicenter for concrete. And I really want to take this time to really thank you guys, the Bureau of Street Services, Nazario particularly, and of course, not just you guys, but Bureau of Engineering, Gary Lee Moore, who's been instrumental because I know you guys are already started or going to start Las Palmas, our intersection. And, we're getting complaints. Even just today, we had some constituents calling in our office for 4th Street, where it's concrete. And because of the cracked concrete, some of the bikers have been injured. It is, I know we've been working closely on this. It's a high priority. And I think you said 5% of our streets are concrete. And the cost for concrete is, I got estimates from 4 times as much or 10 times as much, but is it fair to say it's about 5 times more than regular asphalt?
Yeah, at least. And in fact, we've gathered a lot of information on this topic to try to advise policymakers on what kind of mechanisms could be created to fund these types of repairs. And, when we met with the concrete industry, they couldn't actually tell us about any streets in any city in California, residentials, that were repaved in kind and concrete because of the cost.
Yeah.
So it's not just a problem for here. It's hard to justify that cost.
Yeah, which is what colleagues I spent in my district. I'm using my own discretionary funds because that's one of the problems. We don't know. No one could give us an accurate cost of what concrete costs. So we're doing a pilot project funded by, discretionary funds of Council District 4, where we're going to fix some intersections and streets using city employees, and we're also starting with Las Palmas intersection, and then we're going to RFP out to private contractors for other intersections in the streets. So we could really do a comparison, and I'm convinced that we're going to do it better, and we're going to do it faster, the city of LA. But one of the other ancillary benefits is then we'll actually get some cost figure on exactly what concrete cost. And I think on average, it's at least 5 times more expensive. But also concrete lasts anywhere from 4 to 10 times longer than asphalt as well, right?
Well, that's the expected life of concrete. Concrete should last easily 60 to 75 years. That's if it's not cut.
Yeah.
Once you cut it, once again, you accelerate the deterioration rate of the concrete. And that's precisely what I wanted to share with you, as you mentioned, Las Palmas. With the recent rains, although we may be ready to physically perform the work, the recent rains probably weaken the base under the concrete because we have, of course, cracks and joints. So the logistics of working with concrete streets is totally different than the logistics working, with asphalt streets. With asphalt streets, you see us there one day, cold milling the street, and the next day is paved. With concrete street, we have to open the streets. We have to make sure that the base is solid. We may have to replace the base and bring new material, right? And then we need to form, we need to pour, and it takes about 28 days for the concrete to properly cure. So in terms of disruption, concrete streets are a pain, where, for the residents.
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Ru? I don't mean to interrupt. Is this debate between asphalt and concrete in some of these neighborhoods delaying the work to resurface other parts of the city?
No, because we're going to have a dedicated group of people from our special projects, our concrete crews, doing this kind of work. Our resurfacing crews will not be disrupted by the little concrete work, the pilot work that we're going to do. It is part.
And the argument is a historical one?
So actually, there's multiple, but first off, there's been no concrete repairs in the city of LA for 50, 60 years, except for maybe, right? We haven't repaired concrete streets or fixed concrete streets
We have not had the funding to reconstruct concrete streets in decades. I'm not even sure if the funding existed in the past. Secondly, we don't have the resources nor the equipment to do concrete streets. You require specialized equipment as well. So we don't have that. So all the concrete work that's been done in the city lately in the last 2 or 3 decades has been done under contract. And that's how the work is getting done in terms of reconstructing concrete streets. What we've done in terms of concrete streets is doing overlays. Streets that are not part of a historical zone, we overlay them using asphalt, and that's a methodology fully accepted by the American Association of Civil Engineers and the American Public Works Association. How many inches? 3.5 inches is the minimum. But we typically base them first. First, we grind them to avoid any offsets, and then we put a little layer of base material to make them even, and then we pave them with a minimum of 3.5 inches of asphalt.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, thank you for setting it up. So what I wanted to say was, yes, there are certain areas in my district where we have historical articles where they've been asking for repairs for 60 years. So concrete streets, I don't think we have any evidence of ever being repaired. And the thing is, for concrete, it's roughly 5 times more expensive. We're going to try to work on that, but it lasts roughly 5 times longer, if not longer. So that's why I was working with the mayor's office, and I'm advocating. And even though 5% of our streets are concrete, it's hodgepodge throughout the city. It's how the city was developed. And in major urban centers or major transportation hubs, it was concrete. Other areas were asphalt. That's why when you go through our city, there's patchworks of concrete here and there. And for concrete, it's not just redoing it, but there's 2 reasons. Like in the hillsides, it's concrete. And it's in some of our really narrow streets that it's really hard to even re-asphalt, even if we wanted to. So in those areas, I would argue concrete would be more efficient, because once you do that, even though it is a pain to do it, and once we do it, we probably don't have to go back there for 60, 70, 80 years again. And also it's a hillside safety issue because when it rains, mudslides and whatnot, the fact that it's concrete there, there's less repairs that need to be done. And then there is a historical aspect as well. Like in Hancock Park, it's required by law. City of LA, we required them that only concrete. So even if we wanted to asphalt it, we can't. We'd be breaking our own law. So there's certain areas that even if we wanted to redo their streets and asphalt, we can't. So I'm working with the mayor's office, and I really got to thank Deputy Mayor Matt Szabo, who's been working with us. And I've been talking with the council president as well about we need to have some sort of long-term plan, even if it's a small amount of dedicated towards concrete. And once we finish this pilot project, we'll have a better figure of exactly how much it costs, how long it lasts, so we could dedicate a small portion, to start repairing concrete, and see how it mixes in with the rest of the plan for resurfacing, because it's some areas haven't been worked on for almost a century, and it's also going to be long lasting, and it's going to be cost effective as well.
I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. But you did say that you are repairing concrete streets. You're grinding them, and then you're repairing them with asphalt. You're currently doing that. So you are repairing concrete. You're just not repairing. You're not filling concrete streets with concrete.
That is
correct? Okay. Just want to make sure because it almost makes it sound like you're not getting to the concrete streets. What you just explained earlier was that you are getting to the concrete streets, but if you have a historical situation in that neighborhood, then you can't get to them because you cannot repair them with concrete. Is that correct? Okay.
That is correct, Councilwoman, yes.
Because I'm sure there were concrete streets in the valley.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Councilwoman, at one point, the city of LA had 5,000 miles of concrete street. We're down to 500 miles of concrete streets in LA. So all of them have been overlaid historically, except the historical preservation zone concrete streets.
I'm sorry, the resurfacing of the concrete, the milling of it, is that considered resurfacing, or it's considered, what's that other, you guys showed me that term, I forgot. It's a little bit more invasive than resurfacing, right? It's more expensive?
No, when we overlay a concrete street, we use the same milling machine as if we were going to mill off the top of an asphalt street, but it takes 4 times as long for that machine to mill it because the concrete is so much denser and harder. So when we work with council offices, we have to tell them, if you want us to do an overlay, it's going to require more resources than doing a plain vanilla asphalt grind and pave, because we're going to spend 4 more times. If it would have taken 1 day for a crew to mill it, it'll take 4 days. And so the council offices that have decided to want to work with us to do overlays, they pick a small little group of streets every year so they don't disrupt too much of their program. And we get in there, and it takes us longer, but we are able to.
So how many miles of overlay have you guys done? Do you know, this past year?
I don't have that figure handy, but it's a small number of miles a year that we do.
Right.
And each time we really are working closely with the council office so they understand the impacts, because there is a unit cost that's higher than the regular asphalt work.
Well, again, I'm hoping that we could work with the mayor and maybe the next budget have a little portion for concrete to concrete. And I really want to thank you guys. Really want to thank Greg Moore, Greg Spotts, who else? Kevin James from Public Works. They've all been instrumental because this is a challenge, and I believe that even for a small carve-out, we got to start working towards it. So thank you.
I have 2 questions. How is the funding for street resurfacing and slurry seal allocated per council district? And how much funding are you asking for in the next year's budget for the pavement preservation program?
Sure. There's a formula that allocates the money across council districts that has to do with how many miles of streets are in each district. And that's existed for at least 10 years. I believe that my boss is the one who invented that formula. But it makes sure that districts that have a larger number of streets get a little bit more funding. But it's a mathematical formula.
Technically, that's one of the elements of the formula. We take into consideration 3 things: the pavement condition of the council district, right? The average pavement condition. Interestingly enough, 10 years, 15 years ago, your predecessors presented the Bureau of Street Services the same question. How do I know that I'm getting my fair share of resurfacing and slurry? So we worked very closely with Dr. Shaheen, the creator of Micropaver, and I personally worked with Dr. Shaheen, and we created a formula to not only improve or ensure that we're maximizing the resources in the city, but also to equalize the average pavement condition index throughout the 15 council districts. And we came up with a formula in which Greg just mentioned that the average PCI for the entire network is 62. Well, right now, the average PCI for each council office is in the neighborhood of 62. So no one can tell you that there are better streets in a different council district than in your own council district. Because right now, the average PCI is 62, a little more, a little less per council district. But what we use to ensure that we distribute the money equitable is three things. Number one, the pavement condition of the council district, the area that we need to pave. Obviously, wider streets require more asphalt, more work. Therefore, they will need more money. And the third element that we take into consideration is kind of traffic, type of traffic. If you have streets that have a tremendous amount of buses and heavy traffic, obviously the deterioration rate for those streets is higher than the deterioration rate of streets that don't have those articulated buses, right? So we take into consideration those three elements. In the olden days, what we used to, and I'm sure Councilmember O'Farrell, because he was a deputy at that time, and I remember meeting with him over and over again. In the olden days, what we used to use is a formula, what is called the allocation formula. If you had 10% of the streets in the city, you would get 10% of the money. While good, it wasn't good enough, right? So we decided to bring more elements, including traffic, pavement condition, and the area, which is the number of streets that you have in your council district. We'll be more than happy to provide you, our formula in more detail if you would like to see it.
And how much are you seeking in terms of funding for your pavement preservation program next year, and next year's budget?
Well, again, our request is to, as a minimum, duplicate what we did last fiscal year, 2,400 lane miles. Anytime that we go above 2,000, we are improving the street system. That last year we did 2,400. The Bureau was funded for 2,200, and we were asked to look for ways to create efficiencies to go all the way to 24. The Bureau was extremely successful in creating the necessary savings to go from 2,200 funded miles to 2,400 actual miles. So this year, our goal is for the next fiscal year, is to repeat again the 2,400 lane miles, plus the concrete streets that Councilmember Rio wants. Plus, let me underline that, plus the plus the concrete streets.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I don't think that
Oh,
you
could I
have
just
another
thank?
question?
Yeah, well, no, I just want to really thank Nazario because for last El Nino, he also his department also removes the trees, all the down trees. We unfortunately had some in Council District 4, and they were prompt. I mean, I think you guys got 1,200 service calls, right? So
It's up to 1,400 since Saturday, January 30th, and that's more than an average month.
Wow.
So in a week, we've gotten more than a month's tree emergencies, and we've checked them all, and we're completing the last couple hundred over
Well,
the
let's
next few
hope
days.
that El Nino really does come. It's rained twice.
and you guys cleared that in what, 2 weeks now? That's really good. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
We've been working very hard
much,
to do
gentlemen.
that.
Thank you. That concludes our questions on this item. I see no cards. Yeah, take your award back, yeah. Congratulations. If there are no other questions, I will note and file the department's report. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 4. Mr. Clerk, can you read the item into the record?
Yes, ma'am. Item 4, motion Buscaino Fuentes instructing the CAO with the assistance of the Department of Public Works to report relative to the feasibility of hiring a consultant to assist in developing a new comprehensive program that executes the city's water quality compliance master plan urban runoff goals.
Is there someone here from the CAO's office? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm David Hirano with the Office of the CAO. This motion before you, I think, is a little bit confusing in its moving part. It, as my understanding, talking to the council office, actually refers to hiring a consultant to restructure street sweeping. And this is a result of the work that Mark Thomas, our Fuse Corps fellow, did last year when he identified ways to clean up the city and start the Clean Streets program. So this is our Clean Streets initiative. So this is one of the issues that's hanging out there, and it's my understanding that the chair wanted us to actually look at restructuring street sweeping. So I think that's a clarification.
I think the department here, sanitation. Did you want to add anything? Street sweeping? I thought it was sanitation, but
No, street sweeping in the city of LA is done by the Bureau of Street Services.
did you have anything to add on this?
Oh,
item?
yes. This is the first time we see the motion, honestly. But I had a conversation with Dennis Gleason from Council District 15, and we welcome the opportunity to revisit to review our current street sweeping routes. The great thing about the timing couldn't be any better. As you probably know, last year as part of the budget, actually in this current budget, the Bureau was funded to install GPS systems in each one of our sweepers. So once the GPS systems are part of our sweepers, we will be able to digitally record all our routes, create the data necessary to rethink the way we are doing the sweeping in the streets. So we welcome the opportunity to work with this consultant to look for ways to efficiently create new routes, sweeping routes.
Does anyone have any questions? Well, in my district, there's just major streets that haven't had any street sweeping in decades. So unless we add additional miles to street sweeping, we're going to end up in the same situation.
Yeah, the last time that more funding for postal routes was provided to the Bureau was in 1998. At that time, 800 new postal routes were created, and since the city has not invested more money on creating more postal routes.
Mr. Price?
Even without new routes, and we've talked about this before, how can we change some of the routes? Some, maybe are not as, streets are more or less heavily traveled than
Right,
initially.
and that's what this study and the use of the GPS will be instrumental, because now we can determine a lot of things, a lot of the information that was needed to determine if we're doing this, if we need to redo this differently. There are some locations that historically generated a lot of debris. And back in 1998, or back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, those streets were posted because there was a lot of debris on those streets. But perhaps today, there's not a lot of debris on those streets. And perhaps we can remove the posting from that street and move it to a new location where debris is being generated every single day.
But we don't have to wait for a consultant to do that, do we?
Say that again?
We don't have to wait for a consultant.
That's right.
Well, again,
Do that.
We can do that right now, but that will imply cost. Like, for example, removing signs, recreating signs, moving signs to a new location. And there's also a practice that we follow here in the city of LA. We need to get 66% approval from the residents. Believe it or not all the residents want postal routes, especially in areas where you have a lot of apartments, in areas where parking spaces is...
areas where you really need the sweeping.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. Those are the areas where a lot of sweeping is needed. But once again, the current policy indicates that we need to get 66% approval from the fronting properties. Now, certainly that's
the property
an area...
owner or just the resident? Could it be a tenant?
Property owners.
Okay.
Property owners. So perhaps this is a great opportunity. I hear you, Councilman. Perhaps this is a great opportunity to amend the current policy.
Okay, so we're gonna move along But again, I just want to reiterate, I think what we need to focus on is adding additional miles of street sweeping and not so much on focusing on more consultants and adding an additional report to the pile of reports that we already generate. But thank you. If there are no other questions, I'd like to move that we continue the item and request a written report from the CAO's office that adds next steps, the cost estimates, and the potential funding sources for this. Okay? So without objection, that'll be the order. And I have no cards on this item, Mr. Clerk.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No more cards.
And I have no cards on general public comment either.
None.
So that will adjourn our committee. Thank you very much.